This also feeds into, like, you know, my desire, like, that I had in the back of my mind, staying up late at night to be vegan Oprah. So, like, I get to, like, host a panel with some amazing women and, like, you know, and talk about really, really important issues. Like, we're going to jump right into this, but in case all of you are new to the folks who are on the panel, I'm just going to do really quick introductions right away. Starting from my right over here, we've got, like, Coreena Brown, who just did her presentation in this very room, musician, and now residing in Berlin, although she's American like myself. Please give it up for Coreena. We have internet, television, and radio presenter Sarah Jane Crawford, who also is vegan and has the app VegfestuK. So if you follow, like, you know, applications online, definitely download VegfestuK. She is, like, really, really huge, and we're really glad to have her here today from BBC and MTV. Sarah Jane Crawford, everybody. And noted ecofeminist and author Carol Adams, who has given us The Sexual Politics of Meat, written in 1990, still just as relevant today as it was almost 30 years ago, and just gave her presentation about that in the large auditorium once again. Carol Adams. And we're here to talk about representation in the animal rights movement, and specifically, like, prioritizing the voices of women who make up the majority of people who are in our movement. Now, we have, like, 2 microphones over here with the panel, so, like, when people answer questions, like, you know, you'll have to, like, spell the microphone back and forth between the 3 of you. I can't count good. There are 3 of you over there. So, like, you know, and the first part of this we're going to handle very casually. It's going to be part of an open discussion, sort of talk show style. The panelists will talk among each other and answer a couple of questions about themselves, about, like, their position on, like, you know, on certain issues. And then during the second half of this, we're going to open it up to audience questions. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand. I'm going to come around with the microphone, and you can ask it. And that's like the Russian roulette part of this, because we have absolutely no idea what you people are going to come up with. Scares everybody, especially when it's on film forever and ever. Don't be nervous, though.
Yeah.
All right, so to open it up, I actually do have a couple of things here. Now, this is taken from, like, this video that I'm about to show you. Hopefully this shows up on the big screen. This is actually taken from an event that happened here in London just last year. There was a discussion about representation in the movement that was hosted by, like, oddly enough, an all-male panel. And you know, and one of the questions that had come up was from a woman, and there was, like, you know, I want the panelists to hear her question and hear one of the responses. This is only going to be 45 seconds, and really give your response, how you, like, you know, how you would answer the question and how you feel about the responses that were given. Let's see. Do we have sound? No audio? This is what happens when you don't, like, prepare this immediately. We won't do a reenactment, but, like, you know, we'll try to circle back to that in a few minutes. But we will actually start, like, a really, we'll jump right into a really serious topic right now. And that is about protecting women in the animal rights movement, and about, let's see, and about the culture of sexual harassment and sexual violence in the animal rights movement as it exists today. I don't know if everybody in the room is familiar with these people or with these situations, but just this past year, and I know, Carol, you definitely have feelings about this because you've written about it quite extensively on your blog. But what you're looking at is Humane Society CEO, or former Humane Society CEO, Wayne Pacelle, who resigned following allegations of sexual harassment. And you also see Paul Shapiro from the Humane Society, who resigned over allegations of sexual harassment as well. Again, like, in a movement that is, like, is more than half women. I think it's over 75% women in the animal rights movement. Like, this is a really, really important issue for people to be talking about. Like, you know, about women being abused in the animal rights movement in a space that is, like, you know, that is overwhelmingly female or overwhelmingly feminine. Like, what are your thoughts about these things? What are your thoughts about these allegations? What are your thoughts about, like, about how to overcome this culture of sexual violence against the people that are at work to protect animals themselves? Carol, do you want to start?
I don't have to start?
Yes.
Oh. I've known both these men for 30 years, and I think that when we talk about white saviors, these were two of the guys in the U.S. Now, I don't want to presume that the U.S. figures for the whole world, or that sort of white feminist concerns in the U.S. generalize, but they were sexually harassing. They were equal opportunity sexual harassers. I want to talk about what happened to Jesus, who is shown as white throughout Western culture. So when we talk about the white savior, we're already talking about a deracination that's happened in the way we figure saviors. And these two guys are examples of white saviors. Heterosexual, heteronormative white saviors. And they were allowed to do this stuff for a decade. There were women they were harming for a long time, and often were dismissed. Paul would say the women had lied. Both of these were named this week in the New York Times, 200 men who were affected by Me Too. You might go back and look at that, because these are the two men from the animal rights movement who are reflected in the Me Too. Wayne Pacelles' main goal in the movement was to make it a single-issue movement. And we talked about this 20 years ago when I said I'm never going to be part of a single-issue movement. But guess what a single-issue movement does? Once you have a single-issue movement, then you've told all the women whatever's happening to you is less important than what's happened to the animals. And so all these women that were being affected by these two guys were told, don't talk about it because you're going to hurt the movement. And so I think there's the figuring of the movement when it's always for the animals, that suddenly people who are seen as helping the animals are going to be given a pass. So that's one of the problems with single issue, is that it's going to let harm happen. But the second thing is that they are re-entering the movement now. And they're being allowed to. They haven't been held accountable. Wayne was allowed to resign. Paul was allowed to resign. Neither were fired. They're re-entering the movement, and they're whitewashing, and they're lying about what they did because nobody held them accountable. So just to say, if you want to know about accountability in the animal rights movement and sexual harassment, I do have a blog. I handed the blog over to several of their survivors who write anonymously on my blog. And I write about what accountability looks like, which is basically they need to show empathy for their victims. They need to create justice for the victims, the survivors, and they need to respect that experience. And if the animal rights movement became a place that allowed abusers to run amok, it's also been a place that doesn't know how to hold accountable. And now what the hell are we doing with people who abuse animals? We know how to hold them accountable. Why can't we take accountability and apply it to the men in the movement that were hurting women and discriminating? So, summarize. Single issue a problem, white male savior a problem, accountability and not listening to women a problem.
Thank you so much for that. This of course, like, this goes back to, like, first of all, let me ask Coreena, do you have anything you would like to add to that? Yes? You, Coreena? Not the other Coreena in the back of the room.
Oh, the other Coreena. I'm not completely familiar with this, but I will say, this is a very sensitive topic for me, because what's interesting is in the Humane Society, spaces that are vegan, vegetarian, a lot of times, I don't know who's out here not saying that what they've done is atrocious. I'm sure there's, I'm not saying, I just don't know what that argument or the train of thought would be behind protecting these men. Like what is being said? I would like to talk about that. Like who is opposed to holding them accountable, because any type of sexual harassment, period, point blank, not okay. Doesn't matter if you're the CEO of the Humane Society, doesn't matter, period, point blank. They need to be held accountable. I'm wondering what if they actually said, what is their stance? Are they just in denial, saying that it's not true? Like, I'm just not completely sure about this, but in any case, yeah, I don't really, it's horrible.
I'll tell you something that I actually have heard from people, and this was very recently, because I was actually just at an organization last week in Germany. And one of the things that I commonly hear is, but they have done so much good.
No.
They have done X number of things, or they have saved X number of animals, or like this person has written X number of books, or whatever it is. They have done so much good, and that somehow invalidates or cancels out like what they have done that is bad. And these are people who have who have like, especially like Mr. Shapiro's spoken, who has this is open and common knowledge.
Yeah.
At the very least, admitted to the allegations of harassment, or whatever else may be true. Like, it has been widely reported that that he has admitted to sexual harassment. So these are things. So that's what you hear from people. That's what you hear from
But don't you think isn't it so insane though that an organisation that's supposed to represent equality, this is going on? That this is, for me, the maddest contradiction of all, is that this is the last place that this should be happening. And I think sometimes when it comes to animal rights, especially, and I know this is the radical room, and I think that's a bit of a scary word sometimes because of the meaning around it and the semantics, but I think that sometimes we also have to be responsible for the fact that when we think about animal welfare, and if we're calling it radical and things like that, that sometimes, you hear people advocate that the animals are more important. I hate humans, I love animals. And this, and sometimes you can say it and kind of have a laugh at it, and other times it's quite dangerous, because then what you end up with is a case like this where human beings are overlooked, but it's an organisation that should be dealing in equality for everyone and not just picking and choosing. So yeah, for me that's the craziest thing about it.
The other interesting thing about HSUS in the United States is that HSUS was a key one in defining the activism as becoming more welfarist. So that what is being done for the good of the animals was already defined as what is good for the animals, which was defined by white men. I mean, if we had had a more diverse leadership, would we have gone the route in the US and spent all that time on certain forms of welfarism? They were already constricting and restricting and coming up with a conservative approach that now is thought to have been successful because they got a cage bigger. They got, so that they defined what's success, and then we're defining them as too invaluable because they've been successful according to the terms they created. That's what's insidious.
It is very insidious, and also, again, this is top down, isn't it? Like, this is if these are the people that are at the head of major organizations, and it's not just the U.S. We use these examples as, U.S. American examples, but this is not just the U.S. This is fairly common if anybody has spent any amount of time in the animal rights movement at large. Again, I have to look to Julia, who is actually sitting in the back. Can I also do something really quick? Do you feel comfortable coming up here? It's okay to say no. It's okay. It's okay. I was going to ask you if you had anything that you wanted to add to this, but that's all right. This is very top down. These are the people who are the heads of these organizations, and so if they're setting the standard for how we treat other women, if these people are setting the standard for what qualifies as animal rights, what is the message that we're sending to the women who are working at these organizations? What is the message that we're sending to to people who don't understand animal rights and animal justice? And also, just really quick, Carol, could you because I'm not sure that everybody has the same type of social literacy in the room, for, like, just for the purposes of making sure we're all on the same page, can you tell us about welfare? And, and how people define welfare, animal welfare versus, like, animal liberation, for example.
So at least in the United States, there became a movement, say 20 years ago, where it was going to be incremental. Negotiate to have cage-free chickens, negotiate to get rid of gestation crates. And so the pressure was built. I mean, one of the things that happened is that, for example, with HSUS, they became very cozy with the people they were opposing. And one reason they could is because they were representing the kind of people they were working with, white men working with white male corporate leaders. I think if we had had more diversity at HSUS, there could have been more conversation about, is this the way to go? And I'm going to put in a very cynical thing that's not about welfare. I'm just going to say, and I love seeing all of you here, and I'm not saying anything about a single one of you here, but if you were someone who wanted to sexually exploit women, and I don't use the word predator because why are we bad-mouthing animals? If you were going to sexually exploit women, would you not go to a movement that had a majority of women?
Thank you very much for that. Very sobering. Sarah Jane, did you have anything to add?
I just think that what happens is when you've got a lot of people at the top who are, and it's very samey, and there's a lot of, it's very sort of like, there's a lot of men or a lot of sort of, not necessarily a lot of white men, but it tends to be the case, then you have an issue, whether it's in TV, whether it's in animal welfare, whatever the industry, you have to look at who's running the show, because it's very difficult to get stuff done if it's an old boy network, everyone's agreeing, so that's like the heart of the issue for me, is really kind of like looking at who's in charge and working out how that can be changed, because it's from the top down then, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Coreena, do you want to wrap up this segment before we move on to another topic?
And also I think about how when people think of vegans, how there's some type of, they're morally perfect and they're these perfect beings or something of that sort. And so the excuse of, they've done so much good, and not being able to hold two opposing views of an individual simply because veganism solves everything. They're pure, they're helping so, but that's really interesting to me. It's sick. It is sick and disgusting, and it breaks my heart.
Yeah, the capacity of people to compartmentalize and say X amount of good, outweighs X amount of whatever else it is that someone else has done. That is that's an incredibly dangerous ideology to uphold. We are going to switch screens a little bit, and like I promised you, we are going to talk about some of the topics during this panel, and this is another one that is incredibly divisive. The objectification of women, and particularly in anti-fur activism. I don't know the positions of everyone in this room, but just very briefly, there are large parts of the movement who like to focus on individual single issues as part of animal welfare or animal rights. And fur is one of those spaces that is incredibly divisive, because a lot of people think that good advocacy is to actually go out and be confronting to people who are wearing fur, and as we know, overwhelmingly, those people are often women. And this is especially relevant right now because, Sarah Jane, if you could just show everybody your coat.
It's faux, relax.
It's faux!
No, just because there's more of you than me, I thought, oh my God.
This is that's a fur coat.
And these boots are fake too.
And as are mine. But this is a very important topic to address, because the people who oftentimes end up being confronted by this style of advocacy are women. So, and I don't expect everybody on the panel to agree on, we're walking lockstep on these issues, but I would love to get your feedback on this, one by one, starting with Coreena, going down the other end.
Wow, I think what's really interesting is that there's maybe, I don't know, the same camp of people that would say the last two gentlemen, but they've done so much good and be so forgiving when it comes to the sexual abuse that they've inflicted, but then would turn around and throw paint or think of a form of activism is to yell, scream, violate a woman's space. It just kind of speaks to what people really think about, like what they can do to a woman's body as opposed to the importance of it. It's like, oh, it's no big deal. Look at all the things that they've done, the first two guys. Oh, look at what they've done for animal rights. But then when it comes to a woman walking down the street with, fur. Now listen, I'm not saying, I'm vegan all the way around. So I'm not saying it's okay for them, I just want to make that clear, to be wearing fur, but I think to violate a woman that way is so much easier for people to do instead of calling men to the carpet when they are sexual predators. To me, that is fascinating, actually. Yeah.
Bear with me because this is going to sound confusing. I think if I had spent my life as a vegan, being the sort of big mouth that I am, who's very opinionated and doesn't believe in injustices, I probably would have been somebody who would see someone in real fur and want to shout and be that person who's quite abusive, not necessarily throw pain. However, because I was somebody who 5 years ago was wearing the fur, and I know that when I was wearing the fur, in my head I used to think, I dare someone to come and say to me about my fur, because I'll be like, so what? And I was very sort of like owning the real fur, right? I admit that. But at the same time, I was still somebody who was very sort of anti-racism, anti-sexism, and was very much about fighting for equality. So knowing that I had this real disconnect between animal welfare and where real fur was coming from, and pain and a lack of compassion for animals, and the fact that this disconnect between that and then also, wanting to be somebody who was pro-women and, pro-people of colour, and I can empathise with seeing somebody in fur and not thinking, I don't know, because I've gone on that journey now, for me it would be, first of all, it would be contradictory of me to do that, and, I just think that for me now, I would have a compassion for someone, I have empathy for somebody who's going on their own journey. I think it's unfair, to get in someone's face and chuck paint on them or abuse them, because I know that, because of the journey that I've been on, or like I was saying, on the one hand it would be hypocritical, and on the other hand, I know that you can feel like you're a good person and still be wearing fur, but it is a journey. So, yeah, for me, I don't agree with victimising people because of what they're wearing. I think also it's not effective. I think to try and change people's hearts and minds, it's about sharing with them about your own journey and what you've learned, and kind of getting them around to your way of thinking that way, rather than kind of attacking people, and then their sort of, their natural instinct is to be defensive, and, so that's my viewpoint.
So I think there's three things. The first is the choosing of woman as culprit. In fur producing, who owns the farms, who's making the coats, all of that was a very patriarchal context. And instead of going after that, it was looking at the last step of that fur making, and the woman became the culprit. This all started like in the 80s. It's right when feminists finally got sexual harassment defined and understood legally. And suddenly you're not supposed to sexually harass a woman on the street. And here comes animal rights suddenly giving men a free pass to sexually harass the fur-wearing bitch. Because it wasn't just that they were attacking the fur-wearing, they continued to sexualize or demean the woman. So it was as though, just as animal rights is growing, it hangs on to stereotypical notions of woman as evil that we've inherited from Western tradition, and segments the problem of fur. Finally, who was creating these? I mean, Greenpeace, not the big Greenpeace. There was a smaller Greenpeace organization here in England, and in the 1980s they did an ad that said it takes 80 bitches to make a fur coat and only one to wear it. And it showed a woman wearing a fur coat. It's
wow.
I'll just say it's in pornography of me. Feminists added graffiti to it, so the feminist graffiti picture of that in pornography of meat over on Husband's Day. Recently, oh no, I would say 10 years ago, PETA did an ad that was only shown in the UK, not in the US. And it showed a woman walking down the street and she got beaten up and left for dead by a storefront. And it said, how would you like to be killed for your fur coat? So, you know, talk about participating in a sort of woman needing death, woman deserving death phenomena. So the whole thing was misogynist from the moment it was conceived, rather than contextualized around how do you bring an impact on the fur companies.
Thank you.
Sorry, but you know what, though, I do really believe though that it's a lot of, you know, women against other women. I don't think it's all about just like men victimizing women and it's misogyny. I think it's also like other women who are saying, in fact, it's probably more women, isn't it? Because they're looking at fur and being like, how can you wear real fur? Like, there's so many good fur alternatives. And so I think that that's actually a bigger issue these days, is as women, how do we approach other women that are wearing fur and leather? Do we share with them, you know, our own journey, or whether we've been on that journey or not, or do we attack them? Or is there a middle ground, you know? So I think that that's really what we should also think about as women, and speaking to the women in the room, how do we interact with other non-vegans and people? And I know vegans that are still wearing leather and still kind of, you know, wearing stuff and getting rid of it slowly but surely, and everybody's on their individual journeys, and I think it's about respecting the stage that you're at, isn't it? So that we can all, because this is what it's about, isn't it? It's about equality and it's about treating individuals with respect.
I do have another question here. Like, what do you say to, because these are like common things that are coming to mind that people often throw out there when you're having these conversations about fur. What do you say to, like, well, why is there, first of all, let me just start with, why is there a predisposition to focus, or hyper-focus rather, on fur rather than other types of animal exploitation in the textile or fashion industry? Why is there a preoccupation specifically with fur, or a fascination with it? Does anybody want to like take that?
I had something to say before that, but
okay, we'll come back to it then.
yeah.
We're three mics, I don't know. I think it's because, you know, fur is kind of seen as a luxury, unnecessary item, and it's kind of all singing, all dancing, and it's very leery, and I think it's a bit more of an obvious one to sort of pick on, rightly or wrongly. And so a lot of people argue, you know, like leather, we need leather. I'm not saying this, but I'm just saying, in the past, you know, I've heard people say, you know, well, I'm doing what I can and I need leather shoes, but I suppose fur is just seen as a bit more of that final kind of luxury item that you don't need. And so it just seems so much more wasteful of animals and a lot more cruel. Doesn't mean that we're focusing on the right thing.
Carol, did you have something to add to that?
I was going to say that if we looked at the animal rights movement starting in 1964 with Animal Machines by Ruth Harrison, that one of the things that happened is in the 80s was this focus on these separate issues rather than on the largest issue, which was factory farming. And it's not just about being a luxury item. It's a unique item that often represented the wealth of the man who, I mean, in a heteronormative culture, who was giving the fur to the woman. And so there was that context too, that she's accepted this. But I still believe it was picked because women are more vulnerable. And that it was men in the 1980s in the animal rights movement going after fur this way.
Yeah, but these days I feel like it's a lot more accessible for, it sometimes in some cases is cheaper. Women are much more in control of their own purse strings, and so, you know, 100% agree with you on the whole idea of the journey. But I think now it's a lot more about us owning what we're consuming in fashion, isn't it? And some people just, you know, prefer real fur, and but I think it is becoming more and more sort of embarrassing if you're seeing real fur, isn't it? And it's a lot more unacceptable. The big designer houses are dropping it left, right, and centre from Gucci to Versace. So when the Italians and the French are dropping fur, that's when you know it's going out of style. To speak about it in a bit more of a sort of, you know, like a sort of fashion way, but rather than about animal welfare. So yeah, it's gone on a bit of a journey, hasn't it?
Coreena? Circling back to what you were saying.
Yeah, just before, it's where's the empathy for, it's amazing that men who sexually abuse women for years and years get all this empathy of, look at all the good that such and such did. But then a woman walks down the street with fur and you're yelling and you're like seething, angry, mad. And that just speaks to how we have such a lack of empathy for women.
Have you ever come across men though abused where
I think that with the woman, it's internalized misogyny with women. I think that they've taken on a lot of the narrative of men internally, and that comes out. I do think that there are a lot of women that are actually, when I see pictures, a lot of times it is another woman who's throwing paint or like angry and mad, and I'm like, wow, you're really upset, but then you're willing to let go of somebody who, I mean, I don't know, maybe you're not the same exact person, but I'm saying just collectively, as a group, within the vegan movement, a lot of women are allowing that to pass, a lot of the behaviors of men for years and years to pass, but yet are on the front lines when it comes to a woman walking down the street throwing paint. So yeah, I do think there's a lot of women, and I think that stems from internal, being just an internal misogynist, I think.
I think that on a positive, I think if we go out and we see people wearing real fur, or we suspect it, because some of the faux furs are looking really real right now.
They get very, very real.
So be careful who you attack, okay? Take it back afterwards. No. I think it's just about, you know, just trying to kind of show love, and try to share where you can your own journey and educate people and say, you know what, there's some really good faux furs out there now. You know, whatever your journey is, I don't know, but for me, obviously I would be admitting, you know, I used to wear fur, I watched certain films, and I really sort of became in touch with the, you know, like, and just sharing what we've been through, and I think trying to, you know, help to influence other people where you can is key. Lady over there wanted to say something.
Julia does have something to say after all. Let me come back here, and very soon we are going to open this up to audience questions, so if you've got them, raise your paws and we'll get another scene. Julia, please.
In attention deficit disorder, so I might forget what I'm even talking about. I'm really kind of forgetting. But I think what we're forgetting is, for example, I went vegan because a switch went in my head and I realized what was happening, and I can sort of not empathize, but see the other side where seeing this brings me back to the images of what actually happens to these non-humans. So I can sort of understand the anger, but I think where we're lost is on the focus. Why are we focusing on one form of exploitation when there is so much everywhere? And this is, you know, what I see in my mind, that there's, I mean, yes, these animals need their voices to be raised, but you know, why are you only focusing on one thing when we should be focusing on ethics and veganism collectively? That makes more sense than attacking someone for one particular thing. And I just wanted to make sure that to raise the suffering that non-humans are going through, because I think, you know, that's why we're here and why it's important that we have this conversation.
Thank you for that. I'm going to throw, before we wrap up the fur conversation and move on to the next part of this panel, like I'm going to throw a couple of phrases out there that I hear people say. You ladies ready? I will confront any man also. I don't just confront women, or I wouldn't just confront women. And it's not only women who wear fur. So, like, you know, so what would you say in response to these very common themes that people talk about, or people, like, you know, like will say in response to the number one, the focus on women, and the hyper focus on fur, or anti-fur in our activism?
Do you know what? I just think I think that totally agree with what Julia's saying, but I think that it's about marketing as well. As in, if you know you can latch on to something that's a buzzword or that's going on now, then it's useful. You know, and at the moment, in the last couple of years in the fashion world, fur has been a really hot topic. You know, diversity on the catwalk, are there enough black, mixed race, Asian models on the catwalk has been a topic, and fur has been a topic. So if it's trendy, I don't mean to be, you know, like just kind of, you know, sort of throw it away as if it's nothing, but if it's trendy, then it is actually useful in getting stuff done, because then you have like Versace turn around and say we're not going to use fur, Gucci, but that's only because everybody else is doing it. So, all right, people's motive, you know, the motives may be a commercial thing, but whatever gets the job done, I think that we sometimes have to roll with, you know, what's happening and the momentum and just kind of capitalise on that. And if it's a trendy topic, then why not use that to try and get rid of real fur in the fashion houses?
Capitalizing on topics that are already popular in the mainstream society.
Right, I think in answer to that argument though, if it's a man saying I do it to men, well, then do it with men until we're in a post-patriarchal world.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Don't treat the world now as being the world you think it is, but recognize that what you're doing is, there's already inequality in that interaction, and you're perpetuating inequality.
I swear, every time you say something, I learn something. And not learn, but just, you know, think about.
All of us, right?
We need your
Like, yeah.
Because, you know, a lot of people would argue that I'm vegan because I don't eat meat or dairy, and that's as far as it goes. Or for me, it's a health thing, not for me, but I'm saying different ideas. For me, it's an animal welfare thing. And so the idea that if you're saying you're vegan, you're then, you know, a bit of a hypocrite if you're attacking other individuals, whether they're humans or animals, is interesting.
Just a side note too, when I spoke earlier, I spoke about how vegans and indigenous people have a lot in common in regards to, or some of the tribes have a lot in common in regards to the relationship with animals, and how in a lot of circles the two groups are very pitted against each other, and that concept of the respect for animals and understanding taking another life and what that means, it kind of goes back to that I was talking about earlier. It's really interesting.
Just going back to what you said actually about Michael Vick, is it? What's his name? Michael Vick. And I mean, I think it's all obviously, you know, completely correct what you said. I think, you know, part of the problem is, you know, people are triggered by dark skin. They're triggered.
Yes.
People are triggered. I don't know why. I think we have to get to the psychology of racism. And, you know, so it's something that, you know, so if they see an image or they, you know, hear a story about a non-white person being cruel to animals, you know, animal abuse being perpetrated by non-white people, then they explode with rage. And of course, that racism means that they connect race with behaviour when it's a non-white person committing the crime, let's say. Of course, white people are excused that. You know, one of the privileges that white people have is that their skin is never associated with the crime they may commit, or, you know, their defects or their stupidity or whatever, you know. So it's always, you know, something that is, you know, part of racism, part of racism, connecting race with behaviour. Of course, with white people it's different. I mean, white people are associated, these are all colonial stereotypes, white people are associated with nobility of spirit, beauty, you know, cleverness, all the, you know, so superior qualities. So I think, you know, we have to go back to colonial stereotypes and the psychology of racism. And I know that, honestly, you know, we all know, I think most of us, the people who are not white, we know that we don't have to look for racism, racism will find us. And sometimes it will cause explosions of rage, which are pretty dangerous. I mean, you can be attacked for the colour of your skin. You know, not in this country, not so much, but certainly in other. I mean, I spent the last 4 years in Austria, and so it's perfectly normal to be waiting for the bus, walking down the street, doing nothing at all, minding your own business, and be insulted for the colour of your skin. Yes, yes, it's perfectly normal. I mean, it happens to me all the time. Yes, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Like, I mean, for like speaking to like specifically like the racialized insults that people have. Like, I had done a talk, in fact, Kiki, it was in the Netherlands because he invited me there, about like the political animal, and like and the way that like the way that we just generally lack a political mobilization in the vegan movement or in the animal rights movement, and and one of the segments in that talk actually spoke specifically about that, and how, like, when it was Asian people who were committing, like, violence against animals, you can go through any thread online and pick out very, very deeply racialized insults that people were using to describe the animal abuse. And then just post that next to, and these threads they exist online, they're still there, I check for it every so often, and like, you can absolutely witness it for yourself. On a Finnish fur farm, people focused on the animals themselves as the victims, and there was a complete absence of racialized insults to describe the oppression that was happening. In fact, there was an absence of race altogether. Like, white people are rarely ever racialized. So like white people stand apart oftentimes from from animal violence, or they are made invisible or rendered invisible, like their participation in that chain of of violence. And then it's just like, all these poor animal victims, how can we help them, rather than insert like really racist Asian stereotype here. So thanks for raising that. Like, does the panel want to respond to this comment here?
Oh, wow, that is great. I think I have an idea of the next talk, because that speaks very deeply to me. And the commonality, or what's the word I'm looking for exactly, the similarities of how people of darker skin are treated, and the racial biases that go with that, and the perceptions that go with that, and what that has to do with within the animal rights movement, how they're treated if they were to do something that doesn't agree or fit in the ethics of veganism, are, like you said, much more demonized, much more. Being a black woman, Aretha Franklin, it would never be asked of someone else, another white celebrity, to give their shoes or whatever, like you said earlier. But oh, Aretha Franklin, give those furs away. It's not even a thought. It's not even a thought to not think how offensive that is. It's almost like you're not even considered. You're not important. You're not. There's nothing special about you. Give those furs away, girl. And I think that is very powerful. I'm just blown away because I think about these things. This is an effective, for me, in everyday life, like going about my business, and I'm not looking for anything, but I'm just walking down the street trying to listen to my music or whatever it is that I'm trying to do, and it comes to me. It comes to me. So that was very powerful.
But I would say there's a distinction. It's one thing to have a racist thought, which in a white supremacist culture, racists have. It's another thing to feel you have the permission to express it. And that's white privilege. And we have to label that and recognize that there were two steps in anything that's articulated. The racist imagination, and then the white privilege to be able to say it. And one thing I've always been worried about the animal rights movement, is that it seemed to give an option to whites to say, I'll deal with my privilege over animals. I'm not going to deal with my white privilege.
Yeah.
Or to men, I'll deal with my privilege over animals, but I won't deal with my privilege over women. And we helped create a space that supposedly allowed that, and so now we have this sort of, for some people, I'm sure none of us, I'm not trying to make light of it, but this vegan morality that I have completed my moral quest. It's completed because I'm here. And it's never done. And it's not complete, like veganism. And we've got...
Starts there.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So we've got to break that notion that this vegan morality is permissible in making these judgmental calls. So that's the third step, I think, when you've got this racist explosion that occurs around animal mistreatment and racialized people.
But you know what, it's very shocking to me that there are so many kind of like animal lovers that are actually racists and will get involved in sexual abuse. It's shocking to me. I didn't even really think, no, honestly, I felt like it was, you know, and again, that's me stereotyping what a vegan is or an animal loving person is or somebody who fights for animal welfare, you know. I was joking with Tom earlier when I left my handbag in the room to go out and do some videos, and I was like, oh, we're vegan, no one's going to steal my bag, we're vegan. So it is shocking to me, you know, that that's even like a topic of discussion, but I really did, you know, it resonated with me when you talked about triggers, and I do think that, and the racial you know, the racist imagination, things like that, I do think that people sometimes can't help but to feel extra angry about somebody doing something. I mean, look at the poor woman on the Ryanair flight the other day. The black lady who was abused by the white guy. This isn't about black versus white or anything for me, but I'm just saying, like, I'm talking about how we treat things, and some people will get like a bit of a kind of, you know, I mean, they didn't move him, did they? They just let him sit there and they moved the lady. She just lost her husband, and they can't prosecute him because he was on Spanish territory, or whatever. It was so ridiculous, mainly family. But yeah, again, it's feeding back into the idea that, you know, what suits one is different for someone else, and just how we will get, you know, how we'll have an emotional reaction about a certain group and not another. So yeah, no, it's really interesting and worth noting.
So I see a lot, I see a lot of criticism against actions such as these, often along the lines of it's objectifying women or it's degrading the women. And I have no doubt that the people making these types of critiques believe that. But if the women who carry out these actions consent to that, such as this individual right here, is it really, I guess for lack of a better word, considerate to shame people for consenting to choose their bodies like this?
No, that's dangerous. No, you know, no. Can I just put it to something that this is a little closer to me. So when people, it's like, I'm gonna just give an example that's very familiar with everyone. So Trump. So if there is Kanye West, he's out here running around giving hugs and going to the White House and this, that, and the other, and I have some friends that are like, look, there's a black person that likes Trump. Well, how come other black people? I mean, his free will. Well, it's an okay, right? I mean, why do we want to say that he doesn't have a point? Or why, you know, black people get on code? Like, we don't all have to talk or think, or we're not modular. We can have different ideas. And when you're saying we shouldn't shame the woman who consented to do an ad like this, I don't think it's shaming that particular woman's decision, because we're already in a society, especially in an industry where women traditionally are not in power and maybe not even in charge of this whole thing that's going on. So it's not about the woman and her decision in particular, it's the image and the whole thing altogether, not the participant, right? I don't think it's about demonizing the participant. I don't think we're doing that when we're talking about that. I don't think when I'm talking about a person that is speaking against the community that he's a part of, saying that racism or whatever doesn't exist, you know, it's not that it's Kanye in particular. He can say whatever he's going to say, but what he's saying is dangerous, right? It's dangerous, so it's like, get him out of there. He is not speaking for the rest of us. Her agreeing to this, wherever, I don't know what this is, maybe I'm just assuming, you know, this is an ad, she agreed to it, she got paid for it, what have you. but it's not about her.
Well, the other thing is that the notion of consent assumes that the equality that feminists are working for has been achieved. So to say there's been consent is already imposing a framework upon this interaction that I don't think is accurate. Who decided this was how we do it? And then who decided we must do things for the animals? And then who said to the women, for the animals, we must do this? There is a whole hierarchy of preceding decisions that have created activism as we know it now. And once you have women believing we have to do this for the animals, then their consent has been subscribed to at one level rather than another. And again, the notion of consent assumes that the equality we're working for has been achieved, and it hasn't.
Yeah, but I think we're in a position now where we're, as women, responsible for what we decide to do, you know.
We have women who were victims for 10 years not coming forward because they were told for the animals not to do it.
Are you talking about the whole Me Too thing?
I mean,
or are
back
we
to Me
talking
Too.
about deciding to get involved in a fur campaign?
Right, but
depending
I'm just saying that even women who were abused stayed silent for the animals.
Yeah,
So
I'm
we've
talking
got
about
a
that.
framework in which women putting aside their sense of self was operating at such a degree
Yeah.
that it's, I mean, of course, this is going to be seen as less extreme than that. Yes, I want to honor women's decisions, but I want to honor them within a framework that understands the kinds of pressures that might have been brought that aren't even acknowledged as pressures.
Maybe, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's fine. I just think that we do have a lot of power as women, and I think that we need to be responsible for what we get involved in. I don't think we're always the oppressed. I just don't. I do think that, and this is why it gets tricky when you're talking about the Me Too thing and you're talking about racism and then animal welfare, because there are all these different kind of like overlapping themes. But I do think that we do have a lot more power.
Yeah, it's really like talking about agency versus impact is such, and like we could have another hour and a half discussion about that alone, because that's such a that is an incredibly sensitive topic. I think we have time for 2 more questions before we wrap up.
One word that came up with regard to the fur versus leather debate was vulnerable. Now, vulnerable people are particularly likely to be attacked, not because their attack is prejudices. Prejudiced people will attack anyone, but because their attack is cowardice. So, for example, lots of mothers will pick on elderly or disabled victims, not because they have any hatred for those individuals, but because they have a hatred for taking on a fair fight with some of their own strength. So I think while people have picked on fur-wearing women rather than leather-wearing, dog-owning, motorbike-riding tough guys, while they're not necessarily being sexist, they're certainly being cowardly, and they need to appreciate that they're taking on some of the qualities of those mothers I talked about earlier.
So it's less a question of choosing who we target in our activism is more about targeting people who are already vulnerable in our society. Is that a fair assessment? Yeah. Thank you for that comment. Does the panel want to respond to that? I got a long way to travel around.
There was a gentleman here that wanted to.
Make my way.
Hi. Do you know sometimes in the industry, people talk about racism and stuff like that, but I think sometimes some people haven't been educated on racism, because if you're brought up in a majority, sort of maybe white area, you haven't seen many different cultures, you might have a sort of a preference for your own race, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're racist. Sometimes, with someone's opinion, they just shut them down and say, oh, they're racist, and they're scared to kind of voice their opinions, do you know what I mean? I think that's kind of, if people are too quick to say that, I think sometimes, do you know what I mean? But sometimes someone might not be educated on the actual subject.
I think that's so true, because I grew up in South East London and moved to the countryside, and the difference between the way the kid, you know, in the middle of secondary school, and the difference between the way the kids would kind of like, the jokes that people would crack, but they didn't know any different because, you know, they were just around, you know, there was maybe only a couple of people of colour in the school that they'd grown up with. And I think it isn't just about, you know, like whether someone's inherently racist. I do think we all do have very different experiences depending on what we've grown up with and how cosmopolitan our surroundings have been. So
I think your accent is really heavy. So to me, so could you repeat exactly what it was?
I was just saying about, like, obviously, like, racism and stuff like that, and basically if someone has an opinion on something about sort of, you know, they might have a genuine opinion, they're quick to say, oh, you're racist, you're this, you're xenophobic, or, do you know what I mean? They play that card quite quickly.
You know, yeah, two things. So I am from the school of thought that racist is something that a lot of oppressed or POC people cannot be. Maybe for me, in my opinion, it would be more like a prejudice or a racial bias. I think that people that are in positions of power are racist, and then when we are around other people that are different than us or look different, what have you, that's more of just a set of racial biases and prejudices that you have. So that's one thing. You might have heard the saying, black people can't be racist. And I think that comes from black people in general as a collective in the Western world, in the United States. I have to put all these in the, because we are not in positions of power. We're not, you know, there's not a huge number that are running the government or corporations or in financial power. So that's one thing. But then also, I think that I teach music at a little Kita, and there are a lot of incidences for this story that I'm about to say, but there was one little boy, he was actually from London, and we were all sitting in a circle, and I was a newer teacher, so this might have been him too, just testing me, but he pointed at me. I was telling everyone to sit in a circle, we're going to sing a song, and he pointed at me and he said, "You are dirty," and then he started laughing. And he was just a little boy, right? So, and another teacher said, "Oh, well, maybe it's just, you know, sometimes kids get dirt on their face, maybe he was saying that." And I can't tell you how many times, I work with children, so I can tell you how many times children, 3, 4, 5, 2 years old, have remarked on my skin tone. Some are out of curiosity, some are, they say things, and I'm thinking, where did they get that from? Another little girl said, "Oh my God," I was walking in the store, she said, "Oh my gosh, her skin is so black and ugly." Little girl, 4 years old, 4 or 5 years old, I don't know how old she was, but around that age. And so I think, now listen, they're kids, they're babies, they didn't come out the womb pointing at people saying these things. So where does it come from? Home, the media. I like something that you said earlier in regards to advertising. Advertising is attitudes. Advertising is also books, movies, media that protect people of darker skin that look like me, that you should fear me, that I'm not to be trusted, that I'm not intelligent at all. Like, these are things, it doesn't take a community of people that don't look like me to have a set of ideas about me already in their mind, from home, from advertising, from movies, from so on and so forth, right? So I don't think that we should just not have, just take away all responsibility and say, well, I wasn't raised by, because some people say, well, maybe you're the first black person some of these children have seen. Okay, if I am, then why are you pointing at me saying I'm dirty or that I'm disgusting or ugly or whatever? I think that we should be careful about not having any responsibility because we're not around people that look like us because it comes from somewhere. I think, though, that we should be, I'm very calm about these situations because it happens, it's like a regular thing, like a monthly thing, literally, I'm not kidding you. This is not just because I live in Berlin, this is also in the United States. So, but I think that what we should do is turn it into a teachable moment. That's the teacher in me. I do. I always turn it into a teacher moment. I don't let it go. I used to be, I mean, when it happened the first time, I was so devastated because I was like, this little girl pointed at me. And I thought I was cute that day. I had on my sundress and all my chocolate skin was out, and she pointed and said, it's ugly.
Berlin, yeah.
No, this was in Seattle, Washington, which is where I'm from, which is predominantly white. Surprise, surprise. I was the only little black girl in 7th grade, 8, 9, 10, whatever. So, I don't know about not having any responsibility. That responsibility's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah, no, I think there should be responsibility, absolutely. But I also do think that there's people that are innocently they're not full of hatred, but they will innocently say ignorant stuff. That's what I know to be true from living in the city and then living in the countryside and watching the difference between the way that people speak and knowing that they're all good people.
That's a hold them accountable though, even if you don't
yeah,
I'm a hold them
accountable.
Yeah.
I did, but I'm just saying I think that there's like innate hatred and racism and that sometimes it isn't. I think it's just kind of like not being around enough different people, to be honest.
No, I don't think anyone's innately racist. Like, we don't just come out being racist, but it comes from somewhere, and if you come across me, I'm going to hold you accountable.
Just really quickly, like, to address the thank you, like, I'm trying to pull up with this. This is a really good question.
In the U.S. there's this book, White Privilege, and she talks about how whites are cushioned by our whiteness. So not only do we not have to be aware of race, but we're protected from the kinds of insults that you experience because of race. That we're not just cushioned from knowing we're racist, we're cushioned from racial intolerance that we ourselves are perpetuating. So I think to ever say, you know, we don't know better, that's how white supremacy works, in a way. It suppresses the knowledge of our privilege. But to expose our privilege is a result of a political situation. And we have to expose the privilege for us to understand. So, certainly we live in a culture that's dominated by these white supremacist attitudes, and getting people to think outside of it is important. But we have to question the whole way education's happened, that you have adults who could say something and think it's innocent. How did we end up? I mean, that's white supremacy. That you can be innocent in your racism.
But it happens but the thing is, it happens in a lot of areas where you're not maybe au fait with that area. There's a show that E have just launched, The Byline, and I work with E as a network on different things, and we were talking about like pansexual, all these things that, like, and I was getting educated in an area, and I thought to myself, imagine I feel like I'm the most open-minded person and I'm a social chameleon, and I know that I could possibly have been in conversations where I may have said the wrong thing just because I wasn't educated in that area, you know, in these kind of little pockets of subcategories of, you know, sexuality. So I do think that, you know, it comes down to education as well and being exposed to different groups. Otherwise you can't, you know, I mean, there's different ends of the scale, like we're talking about like blatant nasty racism, but I do think that you need to be, this is why, going back to my original point, there needs to be diversity, you know, high up, so that these conversations can happen, you know, because we're all talking about our different experiences. It wouldn't be like this if the panel was not like this, so, yeah.
Just because we are out of time now, and I know that everybody's probably itching to go to the loop, but like I will just say a couple of words in wrapping up to, like, you know, to address like specifically what you were saying about, like, we play that card really quickly. Like, someone's racist, someone's xenophobic. Now, I would probably say that, yeah, more than likely, if that accusation is made, there was probably racism or xenophobia involved. And the reason why I say that is because we can talk about our experiences from the US, we can talk about our experiences in Berlin, in Germany. But we can also talk specifically about our experiences right here in the UK. Like, just in 2016 or 2017, I believe, the chief of the Metropolitan Police himself actually said that, like, institutional racism is part of our policing. This is a reality that was stated by someone who works at the Metropolitan Police. You can look at any government statistic in the UK, and particularly in England, and see the people of color, minorities, are overrepresented in poverty and underrepresented in positions of power or authority. And I don't know if anybody read this article, but it was like all over the Telegraph, the Guardian, the Independent, just last year, where the UK's biggest landlord actually said that he does not like to rent to colors. We're talking about discrimination in policing, we're talking about discrimination in housing, we're talking about discrimination in education, in economic disadvantage. This is happening across the board. So if someone says that a person has behaved in a racist or bigoted way or xenophobic way, overwhelmingly it's probably true. It's probably true. And I would always want to give the person who's saying that the benefit of the doubt, because we see how evident it is in our statistics and in our everyday lives. So yes, it may happen, few and far between, that someone will make a comment and it wasn't racially motivated or it wasn't xenophobic, but overwhelmingly it probably was. And yeah, I think that it's more important to recognize the impact that these systems have on us. Like, if we, and I'm making a point here, I know that I'm making it very slowly, if we actually extrapolate this to animal rights, most people will probably say they love animals. Most people probably say that they love people of color. Most white people will say this. But are completely ignorant to the ways in which we're complicit in oppression against these marginalized communities, because it's not part of our everyday experiences, as Harold already said. Like, this is something that happens. I love animals, but what's invisible to me is the incredible amount of sexual violence, of torture, a lifetime of forced imprisonment, like, you know, and ultimately a betrayal of murder that goes into the consumption of their bodies one or more times a day. And so we don't see that. We don't see the exploitation of animals. It's evident in our textiles. It's evident in the ways that we interact with animals all the time, that it's not just the animal companion who is in front of us. Likewise, we don't see this when we're talking to or about people of color. I would never call someone,